Welcome to Cherry Red TV and AFC Wimbledon TV. I'm Iain McNay, and today I'm joined by Erik Samuelson. Hi, Erik.
Iain, hello.
And Erik is the CEO of AFC Wimbledon. And we're going to find out more about Erik and about his life and about what makes him tick. So let's start by going back to your roots, because you were born and brought up in the northeast of England, weren't you?
I was born in Sunderland, the youngest of 5 children, in 1948. Lived in a little, the outskirts of Sunderland called Fulham, and went to school there. And then when I got to 11, my parents decided I was quite bright and sent me to school in the enemy, if you like, Newcastle, which is where I had my secondary education, which didn't do me a lot of good, if I'm honest, but that's another story. I learned my football in Sunderland.
So were you playing football there?
Yes, I was. It was street football. You played on concrete outside. We had a corner shop. My mum and dad ran a grocer's, which they then converted into an off-licence, which is quite ironic because I'm teetotal. Despite having tried every drink in the shop, I never found anything I liked at an early age, so I stayed teetotal.
So literally you were going around the shop trying every
bottle? Well, almost literally. And in those days, they used to sell horrible things like sherry out of sort of plastic barrels. There'd be a little tap, and we'd keep these things in our living room. Our living room would have, at Christmas, when the shop was very busy, we'd have an entire wall with racks of bottles, spirits, wine, sherry. Is sherry a spirit? I don't know. Anyway, all those things. And whenever I was trying to tape record music from Radio Luxembourg, you'd hear in the background my dad shouting, "Another crate, please, Erik," or whatever, because you couldn't record direct to tape in those days, or if you could, I didn't know how. So it was really quite a strange upbringing. It was a 2 up, 2 down, which I think Southerners think is some kind of northern deviation, but actually it's just 2 downstairs room, 1 up. One of the downstairs rooms was the shop, there's a living room, and then upstairs just 2 bedrooms for the 4 children. My sister was killed just before I was born. The next one up, 2 bedrooms, mum and dad, 4 kids. Right. I'm not trying to sound deprived, but it was. Because that's how life was, you lived in a house like that. So the best thing you could do is get out in the street and play. So we did. And I played football and cricket, which, a very narrow road, and with a fence opposite and a greenhouse just behind it, we had to play who could stay in the longest, which rather determined my style of batting, which I would say makes Geoffrey Boycott look adventurous. That's the only game you could play on that street. You hit a decent shot and smash a window and you're in trouble. So that was my street sports education.
And did a few windows get smashed sometimes?
Not by me. My brother was, who unfortunately died about 10 years ago. He was a reckless lad in a nice sort of way. And you'd say to him, just be careful today, Colin. And the next thing, smash. He just never had any great restraint. Which made for lots of escapades that, he got me into trouble quite a lot. And we used to fight like cat and dog. I miss him, because brothers who fight usually get on very well deep down.
Yeah, there's a bond there usually.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. So which was the first football match you went to?
It was Boxing Day, either 1958 or 59. I looked it up a while ago. Sunderland-Newcastle derby, the game. And I was young enough not to be that bothered when the fact that Sunderland lost at home to Newcastle 6-1. I mean, when you're a bit older, that's
scoreline.
It is. But I think in those days, maybe not that year, but in those days, they played football on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, I think. I'm almost certain that they played on Christmas Day, although I never went to one of them. So obviously you really did play a local derby because you didn't have the transport then that you had now, and didn't have private transport. For me, it was a walk with my dad and my 2 brothers. I think we had 2 seats at each end of the main stand there, down to Roker Park, which was within hearing distance. I knew how many we'd scored when I was playing in the street if I didn't go to a game. I could hear the crowd. It was about half a mile away. But either they made a lot of noise in those days, or there's a lot less background noise than there is now that diverts you from it.
Probably both are true, actually.
Probably both.
Yeah.
And I'd be playing football in the street, and as people hurried past at the end of the game, we'd run up to every one in about 100 and say, what was the score? Because you caught the people who left before the end.
So at what point did you feel you were a real Sunderland supporter?
Oh, I mean, that's all you were. You lived in Sunderland.
Yeah.
Newcastle were the enemy. None of these words like the Mags or Mackhams or Tackhams, all that stuff, that all came out of a Wiedersehen pet. I lived in Sunderland for 21 years and never heard the word Mackham. It's just an invention, as far as I'm concerned. So you just supported Sunderland. And you can imagine going to school in Newcastle when Sunderland were having a bad run was a nightmare. Because, you know, an all-boys school, you just get ripped apart for it. But that's what football fans do to each other.
And were you playing football at school on real pitches?
Oh, it was a dreadful school. They only played rugby.
Okay, same for me actually too.
Football was a game you played when the pitch was too dangerous for rugby. And football was a game you played in the holidays, and you'd organise higher pitches and play together. But travelling to Newcastle just to play with my mates was a bit of a burden, and we didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't do it very often.
And were you good at school?
Junior school, I was very bright. I know I shouldn't boast, but I was. I was always top or second in the class in what was quite a good local school, junior school, state school. And my parents decided, my elder brother, who's very bright, brother David, and very knowledgeable, really stuffed me at an early age by pinning on me the fact that I was the brightest in the family. So he took all the pressure off him and put it all on me. And my parents decided to send me to the Royal Grammar School in Newcastle, which was a semi-independent school. It was called a direct grant school in those days, where you had basically, you paid a fee, but if your parents didn't earn a lot of money, you got some kind of assistance on it. So I commuted to school every day for 7 or 8 years on the train, sitting in the guard's van having quiet, sneaky cigarettes and trying not to be seen. A long time. I don't smoke now. I gave up 30 odd years ago, but that's what you did in those days.
It's true. Yeah. So, and then you left school and you you started to train as an accountant.
No, I left school. I went to. I was quite ill. I had quite a lot of illness when I was a kid. I had polio when I was 5, and then again when I was 7, and I had further illnesses in the senior school, which meant that I screwed up my A-levels really, and I'm blaming that on being ill. It's probably a lot of it to do with being quite lazy too.
I can't imagine you being lazy because you work so hard now.
I'm lazy at things I'm not interested in, and I wasn't interested in school. And years later, I read a book, A History of My School, which talked about how they felt that they left behind the kids who just didn't quite fit in or weren't that bright, and that's how it felt to me. The person who wrote the book said, of course, that wasn't true, but I remember thinking, there's a minority report here. I'm the one who didn't feel he made the most of his skills at school. Anyway, I did my A-levels twice and then went to university in Nottingham, where I studied metallurgy.
You studied what?
Metallurgy or metallurgy. I never even learned how to say it in all that time I was there.
And what's that exactly?
Study of metals, materials,
Okay,
alloys, all that sort of stuff. In those days, again, I've used that term a lot, but it was different then. And when you did your A-levels, you couldn't, as nowadays say, do English, French and physics. You just couldn't. You either did 3 sciences or 3 arts. So you do English, history and economics, or maths, physics and chemistry. I did maths, physics and chemistry because everybody said I was good at maths, and I wasn't. I was good at arithmetic, which is very different. So I'm really good at numbers, but I'm not good at maths. Anyway, I did those, and that rather narrows down what you can do at university. And given that I am hopeless visually, I just can't picture things or draw, the range of things you could do that didn't involve some kind of technical drawing or whatever was quite narrow. So I chose metallurgy for no other reason than I could do that, I thought. It wasn't an ambition. I was quite good at it. I got a good degree. Stayed on and did a further degree, which I never finished, but played an enormous amount of football. 5-a-side, 5 days a week, and 11-a-side on Sundays, and Saturdays I'd go to a game.
So which position was your best position?
Well, in 5-a-side you play almost everywhere, but I scored goals.
You're
I don't mean
a goal
to be
scorer, yeah?
Yeah, I mean I scored goals. Didn't John Mayne say that on the television? I wouldn't dream of getting a comparison, but I was good at 5-a-side because it's played on a hard surface like my football as a kid was. You didn't do slide tackles when I was a kid because you're on concrete. So you couldn't. So I was very good at the confined spaces of 5-a-side, and oddly, because I was incredibly fit for that, on a Sunday playing 11-a-side, it's a completely different game, I'd be knackered after half an hour. Maybe I thought I could keep up the same running patterns, I don't know, but I was never as good. I I was never very good, Ian. I just loved it. Like anybody who plays the game, you play at the best level you can.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's what I did. And I played cricket too, but again, not to a fantastic standard. Opening batsman. I can't bowl to save my life.
So your career as such, I wonder how you got to be an accountant. So.
Well, my parents always said I ought to be an accountant because I had this facility with numbers, and it is a facility. I mean, I don't know why anybody would want to, but I can do square roots in my head and all that sort of stuff. I'm not very quick, but I can do it. And I multiply numbers out incredibly quickly.
Was that something you practiced, or you always had that
I don't know.
ability?
I just was good at it. I don't know. Anybody who works in a shop, anybody who plays darts, can tell you how to get from 113 down in 3 darts, just like that.
Yeah, that's because they're practicing.
That's because they've done it.
Yeah,
But because they've done the numbers often. Maybe
Yeah.
I did it a lot. Maybe I had a facility for it. Maybe it was to show off. There was a program when I was young called Double Your Money, which was a bit like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in the concept. Every question, twice as much money. When I was 10, I answered the top prize question on mental arithmetic faster than the contestant. I was just good at numbers.
Yeah.
So everybody thought it'll be an accountant because they thought that's all it was, which it isn't. But so when I went to university and found metallurgy a bit, well, I wasn't very good at it. I got a decent degree, but I faked it really, and decided to train as an accountant. I saw the light, so this was the thing to do. And I went to train in London, and while I was at Nottingham, messing around playing football, I met Eileen in 1970. My wife, who we got married in 1975. She came down to London. So I started work in London in 73, and we commuted a bit to see each other. Came down to join me in 75. We got married, came down to join me for a temporary stay. And still there, living a couple of 100 yards away from our first house. We've only ever lived in 2 houses, and all the time we've been down in London. And married in 75, and then family in 80 and 82, 2 boys.
So how did you get? How did you first start watching Wimbledon FC? Because I think she was a Derby County fan, you were a Sunderland fan, you were down south in London. So what happened there?
I measured my life in terms of things that happened at Sunderland. I used to irritate Eileen immensely by saying we got married 2 years after Sunderland won the cup. But that was the heart of my life. But oddly enough, I went to the game at Selhurst Park, the Wimbledon Leeds replay with a bunch of blokes from work, the sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're exactly the sort of people that come along to a big cup match just because it sounds interesting.
Yes.
And everybody wonders where they go after that, and I was one of them at that game. And I did think Wimbledon were unlucky. I remember the game quite well. My elder boy Peter went to school in Beatrix Potter School down near Earlsfield, about half a mile from where we live. And at that school you supported Wimbledon or Chelsea. I didn't try to indoctrinate him with being a Sunderland fan, although I think it's fair to say that my 2 boys both have a soft spot for Sunderland because of me. And they went to Roker Park, and they've been to the Stadium of Light. And Peter, for whatever reason, I don't think he could answer, chose Wimbledon. And I'm pleased about that, because as a northerner I would have struggled to avidly support a big London club, Chelsea, Tottenham, Arsenal, those sorts of teams. But Wimbledon was fine, small club.
It's interesting because there's a lot of people that support Wimbledon that actually have come from other places around the country, previously supported other clubs, and somehow you're absolutely right, they choose them because they're almost like neutral insofar as they're not one of the big London...
Yeah.
Historically big London clubs.
As a northerner, there were certain things that were known in those days, like Southern football as a soft. That big clubs like Spurs and Arsenal were terrible places. No rationale behind it other than, well, I'm northern, so I'm bound to think that. So when Peter chose Wimbledon, that was fine, and I took him to his first ever game in September 1987, I think it was. We were away at Arsenal, and Eileen will tell you that I'm often known as the late Erik Samuelson. I tend to arrive not quite on time. So by the time Peter and I got into the ground, Wimbledon were 1 down. We sat next to this young boy who turned to Peter and said, "Don't worry, we're 1 up." And he was thinking, "No, we're not. We're 1 down." Wimbledon were dire. They got beaten 3-0. They played awful football. When on the rare occasions they got the ball, is my memory. And I remember thinking, oh, he's not going to support these. But of course, 7-year-olds see a game very differently from adults. And he thought it was great. He'd never been to a live game before, the noise and all that stuff. And he stayed with Wimbledon. In fact, as we left, he asked me to buy him a scarf. And because I thought he'd never support them, I said, let's wait till Christmas and see how it is. And I've never been allowed to forget that mean, uncaring father who wouldn't buy a scarf for his football-mad son. And of course, the following May, we won the cup. We went to some of the rounds, not all of them. We went to the semi-final at White Hart Lane, and obviously the final. Peter and I did. The younger son, John, didn't go, and neither did Eileen, although I guess we could have got them tickets, but we didn't. And, you know, you're 7, you pick a team, they win the cup. Life's like that, isn't it? It's nice and easy. And John, for obscure reasons, flirted with Spurs for a couple of years, which was okay because they had Waddle and Gascoigne in those days, and so they were a delight to go and watch. But then Christian Gross came along, and John lost it with Spurs and converted to Wimbledon. And when I discovered just how easy it was to get season tickets, because by then we'd moved to Selhurst, we bought season tickets. And they made a really big decision for me. I try to listen to my sons, or they'll tell you I don't. But I said, you know, let's get some nice seats in the middle so we get a good view. No, I want to be where all the noise is, because they were kids. And, you know, they wanted to be behind the goal where people make all the noise, as central as possible. So when they opened up the Holmesdale Road end, which we started in the other end, is it the White Horse Lane end?
Yes,
that's where we started, because they were rebuilding the other end. Yeah. When they moved into Holmesdale Road end, we asked for seats halfway back in the middle, and that's where we watched Wimbledon from. Yeah. And it took me back to when, as a kid, I went to Roker Park and stood behind the goal and felt part of the football crowd. And I think that's where I am at heart, which is why people who know me will often see me at half-time wandering behind the goal to stand with.
That's what you do, because I was next to you at matches, and you always wander down.
I nick half a dozen cakes that are left over from the boardroom and take them down there so that they welcome me, because who wants to stand with their boring old father? But if I bring cakes, it's a sort of small bribe. And I stand behind the goal, and I wouldn't say it takes me back to my Roker Park days, but it feels like the right place to watch football from. And I can abuse the referee, which isn't so easy from the director's box.
You really abuse the referee?
No, I don't. But I can shout.
Yes.
And while I do say some things from the director's box, I feel constrained by where I am and who's there. And behind the goal, you can just let rip.
Of course you
can. And I do,
yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. So let's just go back. So at what point did you feel you're a real Wimbledon supporter?
I was very clear. I can't remember the time, but I could look it up, because we used to go in the family enclosure in the quite early days at Selhurst, so we did sometimes. And I took Peter and John to see Wimbledon play Sunderland. And Sunderland tried to kick Wimbledon off the park, which was, I felt, a sort of reversal of roles from the image Wimbledon had in those days. And about some time into the game, one of them turned to me and said, why aren't you shouting for Sunderland, Dad? And I thought, well, that's a good question. And I realised I wanted Wimbledon to win.
Yeah.
Now, back home, that's heresy. Yeah. That's excommunication. Forgive the religious theme, but it's almost a religion in the northeast. And but I just realised I wanted Wimbledon to win. And it was a great way to spend time with your family. Yes. Eileen's into football anyway. She's not doing it just because we do it. She's always been interested in football. And Mum and Dad took her to see Derby when she was young. And so we got an extra seat behind the goal, and she came every week too, and to quite a lot of the away games that the boys increasingly twisted my arm to take them to. And actually, when I'm honest about it, I did need my arm twisting. I remember when I worked at what was then Cooper's Deloitte, I had one of my clients was Nokia in Finland, in Helsinki. And I remember one of my managers, my senior managers, saying, Erik, if you go out for this meeting with a client and you go from Gatwick and park your car there, you can get back in time for the Gillingham game. You can drive from Gatwick and get to the game in time if you get the 2 o'clock flight from Finland or whatever it was. And I thought, now that's a man who understands me and understands what's important in my life. And I centred an awful lot of my life around football and Wimbledon,
Yeah.
and watching the boys play, and running football for kids on Saturday morning, which I did to let my two boys have a place to play, and that grew and grew. That was something just for fun too.
So were you going to most Wimbledon away matches?
We had a season where I think I went to every one. I didn't go to all of them. I remember missing the away replay at Wrexham. The home game I remember was that one where Marcus Gale scored from a corner in the last seconds, and the referee blew the whistle between the corner being taken and him scoring. So it was a draw. And the replay was in Wrexham, and I agreed that my elder boy, who must have been about 14 at the time, could go on the fans' coach. And I didn't go for some reason, and part-time supporter was the and I've never been to Wrexham, so next season I can put that right and catch up with him. Yeah. I went to every game I reasonably could, which is almost all of them.
So what was your feeling then when we got relegated from the old Premier League to the old First Division?
I remember it well. We drove down to Southampton, and
because the previous game had been that dramatic last-minute Hearts
I've
goal.
never been so excited or loud as the Hearts equaliser from a corner against Aston Villa, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
A corner that some young defender should never have given away, I seem to remember rightly. I've got no visual memory. Seriously, I struggled to conjure up a picture of my family. I just can't. But funnily enough, I can remember that goal. I can remember the way John Hartson leaned back to give himself the room to deflect it into the net. And then we went down to Southampton, and I remember saying to some Southampton fans, who were very friendly before the game, that I thought we'd lose but stay up, because I thought Bradford, was it, would lose to Liverpool.
That's absolutely right, and they beat them, didn't they?
They beat them 1-0.
Yeah.
And I think it was at home, but nonetheless I expected Liverpool to beat them. And when we went one down to a free kick, I'm almost certain it was a free kick at that end where I was sitting, and I don't know by then whether Liverpool were ahead or not, but I think
Bradford were ahead.
Bradford were ahead.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, oh no. And I don't remember the second goal. I remember the team was a bit odd. I think he played Alan Kimball at left midfield and someone else at left back. I've forgotten who it was, because it was Terry Burton by then. I remember thinking that was odd, but clearly gone for the draw, thinking that would be enough, was my thought. And we drove home in absolute silence, total silence. I had a client at the time who knew, because they had no choice, everybody who knew me knew what I was interested in, saying to me on the Monday that he'd seen photographs of Wimbledon fans in tears, and isn't that ludicrous, it's only a game. I remember thinking, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't in tears, but no, you don't understand. And it was dreadful.
And then we went down, and we had two pretty bad seasons. And
we did, but you live in hope, don't you? I go to every game expecting to win. Every game. I don't expect to win all 42, but every individual game I expect to win.
But of course, behind the scenes, the moving of the club was growing, and the Milton Keynes thing was building momentum. Were you involved with Whistler at all?
No, I wasn't. I think I was quite naive. I was probably, in many ways, a typical football fan. I'm not saying a typical Wimbledon fan, but a typical football fan. As long as I could go to games and watch what was going on, it was fine. And I would say to the boys, I don't believe a lot of this stuff about moving. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's a way of putting pressure on Merton Council to try and get a proper ground. That's what I thought, because I didn't read guest books. I didn't read much. I just read about the team, went to games, and that was it. So when it became obvious it was serious, I got quite concerned. Still didn't do much, because lazy football fan. And then one of my clients was Safeway, now owned by Morrison's, but at the time it was Safeway, and they owned Plough Lane, as many fans will remember, and had been trying for several years to put a supermarket on the site, and I think eventually a government review decided that they couldn't. But they were getting quite a lot of bad publicity about the site, and the finance director there knew that I was a Wimbledon fan, and I think he thought it wouldn't be a bit of bad PA to say, would some fans like to visit the ground before they were obliged for health and safety reasons to pull the stand down. I think there's some issues about asbestos. So he used me as a means of helping that to happen. And to do so, I approached Chris Stewart. I'm pretty certain it was at the Brentford pre-season friendly, which was pretty well the day it was announced about the intention to move. And so I arranged that. Well, Safeway did through me, and 20 or 30 of us went there. I remember a particularly poignant moment where my younger son, John, stood on a nettle, really, on what was roughly the centre spot, and he said, Dad, I've always dreamed of standing on the centre spot at Plough Lane, but not like this. And he sort of looked around, and there was overgrown and the stand rotting, and lots of things that were worth salvaging already been taken.
Yeah.
I thought that was really sad.
But you hadn't actually watched football at Plough Lane, have you? If you first
we did. We watched a few, because
you did?
The last game at Plough Lane, I think, was in 1991, and we started in 87.
Oh, right, okay.
So we went 10, 20 times. But it is true that Plough Lane doesn't have the same emotional attachment for me as it does for people who watched through the non-league days. And indeed, we started supporting Wimbledon when they were a Premier League team. So I only knew them as that, and then was it Division 1 then, rather than a Championship team? Whatever.
It's called Division 1.
It was Division 1.
Yeah.
So that's all I knew of Wimbledon.
So then everything started to kick off when the Milton Keynes was announced. Yep. And there was that dramatic meeting at the WISA called at the community centre in Wimbledon, where there must have been about 1,000 people packed in there.
There were.
And Chris Stewart made his famous speech, I just want to watch football, yeah.
I'd got to know Chris and Ivor, indeed, before that, partly because I got involved in the start of the Don's Trust, and I was on one of the working parties. I can't remember, but it must have been finance, because that's the obvious thing for me to do. And as part of that, I vividly remember saying to my two sons, this is going to be really exciting, because either, and what I thought was going to happen was, Wimbledon will not be allowed to go to Milton Keynes and be put into administration. That was the threat. And we're going to have to try and buy it and run it. Or we're going to have to start a new club, I said, sort of as a throwaway, laughing remark. And as part of that, and I think it must have been through my meeting Ivor and Chris at the Don's Trust Foundation, I wrote a business plan for taking Wimbledon FC brackets in administration and playing them. And with them and with Lou Carton Kelly, we produced the most appallingly bad business plan for taking it over. I wouldn't say thank goodness it didn't come to that, because you don't know what would have happened, but it was naive.
So bad, then?
Well, it was naive. It had all sorts of assumptions in about what it cost to run a football club, how you do things. We didn't have any information. Yeah. Football clubs don't publish any useful information. Yeah. Well, I don't think they do. But I did that. And then when it all fell apart, I remember I found out I was in a taxi from my office to a client, and sat in a daze in the client meeting, just thinking, no, it can't be, this can't be happening. And spent, while the activists, Mark Joneses and the Chris Stewarts and the Ivor Hellers and the Trevor Williamses and so on, were down at the pub in Wimbledon, the Fox and Grapes. I don't go to pubs, I don't drink, I can never remember the names of pubs, they don't mean much to me, but I think that was the one, saying, let's start again. I was just sitting thinking, well, there's no point reading the paper, or the sports page. There's no point looking at CFAX. That's not my team anymore. I'm not going. And then there was a meeting, the WISA meeting, which I went to. Yes. And after that I said to Ivor and Chris, well, would you want a business plan for a non-league team? And they said, oh yeah, please. And so I wrote one, which was still wildly out, but not as bad. And the main reason it was wildly out was I thought we might just get together 1,000 fans. And so everything was predicated on, we will have 1,000 fans supporting us. And the rest of it, I must dig it out someday and see how bad it was, but I think it wasn't unrealistic.
You should publish it in the programme, that'd be interesting, yeah.
Only interesting to accountancy.
That 1,000 fans turned into 4,500 the first home game, didn't it? In the Combined Counties League.
Did, 4,215?
Chipstead game, was it?
Yes, it was.
The doors were locked, weren't they?
I don't know if you know that the man who managed Chipstead that day now runs our under-18 team, by the way. Russell Harmsworth.
Oh, right.
He does.
Brilliant.
So I understand. I've not gone back and looked it up, but I've been told, which I think is a nice, and I think that's rather nice that happened. I missed the Sutton game.
Didn't they? They beat us.
They won 2-1. We won at Sandhurst 2-1.
Yeah.
Before that, we'd had, was it 10 pre-seasons? I think we eventually won the last one against
Enfield
Town. 3-2, I think, something like that. I missed the Sutton game because some things in life are really important to me. Family, as I think is probably obvious, and also loyalty. And I was invited to a friend's retirement dinner that night, which I'd agreed to, and I thought, I must go, you only retire once, and I missed the game. I think, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only game Eileen's ever been to on her own. And she was really well looked after by Ivor and lots of other people, and had a great time. When I came home, I had to listen to all this, having been at what was honestly rather a boring dinner. But there you go.
Anyway, it was really quite a special time, not just for all us Wimbledon fans, but for football in general, because this was the first time a fans club had been started at that level. OK, Enfield Town had done it when they broke away from the old Enfield at one point, but this was on a much larger scale, and there were a lot of eyes were watching us in a way to see, could fans really run a football club? Could they organise themselves? Would there be trouble with all 2,000 people watching away games? And you were quite involved at the start, weren't you?
I was. I would be so proud to say I was one of the founders, but I don't regard myself as one of them. That was Trevor Williams, Ivor, Chris Stewart and Mark Jones.
Yes.
And some of them worked from a cupboard of an office in Ivor's factory up by Hayden's Road. I dropped in now and then because I was still full-time at PricewaterhouseCoopers, as we'd become known then. We'd merged yet again. So I was doing stuff remotely, but I basically said to them, I've done your business plan. I said, can I please be your finance director? That was how things did. And actually, Ivor and Chris owned the club at that time. They'd set it up as a £2 club, and later they sold it to the Don's Trust for £2. But at the time, Ivor and Chris were Wimbledon FC. Okay. They were the sole shareholders. Yeah. I wonder what they could get for us now if they'd stayed the owners. But then it would have been a different club, so it's speculation. And it was very exciting. It never occurred to me it wouldn't work. Never occurred to me. I'm a sort of blind optimist in certain respects. However cautious I might sound, I thought it would. But I knew nothing about non-league football. I'd never been to a non-league football game. The boys had. They used to go and watch Kingstonian and Tooting and Mitcham at their respective grounds when they couldn't go to a Wimbledon game, or when they midweek when they wanted a game to go to. So I was impressed when I got to Kingstonian's ground, as it was then. It was much bigger and better than I thought it would be, and realised that we had the start of something good there by being able to play there.
So you were then offered the role of financial director?
Yep. I had to clear it with my company, because you're not allowed to be a partner in an big accountancy firm without, and also director of a company. But they said yes. They're very understanding. And I think it's probably true to say that for the next 18 months before I retired from that company, a significant proportion of my time at work was spent doing Wimbledon stuff. And actually, looking back at it, I don't feel too guilty. It's quite common. It was quite common in PwC for a partner to announce his retirement, and then you gradually pass on all your clients, and an awful lot of them freewheel down to retirement. I didn't freewheel. I worked like mad, but I wasn't working like mad on the things that PwC were paying me for. I don't think they're going to come and ask for the money back now. I hope not. And it was great. It was. I was 55 when I retired. Yeah, 55, and I'd discovered my lifetime's ambition, which was to do what I was doing. And how many people?
Is that really true? You were imagining when you were a kid?
No. I didn't imagine it. When I was thinking of retirement before this started, I thought, I wonder what I could do. And the classic thing for a partner in a big firm like I was at was to be a non-executive director. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could be a non-executive director of a football club. That would rivet me. Really interesting. And then this came along. So no, I didn't realise this was my ambition. I was doing it, and I thought, this is what I've always wanted to do. But I've never realised it until I was doing it. And most people don't get to do all their ambitions in life. And I feel so fortunate, so blessed that I can.
Anyway, you then, shall we say, graduated or moved across to become CEO after about 3 years, was it?
It's 2.5 years ago, and we've been going 7 years, so
3.5 years.
4.5. 4.5. Okay. That's the accountant doing me.
So you became CEO, and how was that? There you were, full-time job, you'd retired, you'd got a full-time job and earning, I think, £1 a year.
I think I wasn't even paid that at the time. I think I negotiated that later.
So you're still on the pound, were you?
No, I was on nothing.
Okay.
As indeed Chris Stewart was for the first few years that he did it. And then we sorted things out, because he'd been fortunate enough, I think he might say that, to be made redundant the day of the Milton Keynes' announcement. So he was available to do the job, and it was great that he was. He did a really good job. What did I think? I was very frustrated with some of the ways the club was running. I'd come from an organisation where everybody was... there were ways of working that just happened. So in a company like PwC, if you'd say to one of your managers, I want this doing, and you just forget about it, because they'd come back when it was done, it would be done on time. I found in the club, because of the way in which we all worked together, there were people who would drop in and do a piece of work as a volunteer and not, that I found it very hard to get used to the idea that you couldn't have things when you wanted them, just like that. A syndrome in PwC I called the partner's child. I want it now. And you'd get it, because you were quite senior.
And you were
seemed to be quite important.
Jobs.
You're paying people, whereas volunteers, it was harder. I can't think of a volunteer that's ever done a bad job, but they haven't always been there when you need them, exactly when you need them. Yeah. So I found that frustrating. And there are other things I could see were absolutely urgently needed that I wanted to get on with. So it was straight in at the deep end, and I love it. It's a brilliant job. It's the best job in football. But don't tell anybody, because I don't want anybody else wanting it.
So, do you get to talk tactics with Terry Brown, the manager?
Sort of. I try very hard to make my points by asking questions. I don't think it's for me. Terry's very good, you know. He used to be a salesman. He's very good at selling ideas. He's very good at managing people. I think manipulating would sound too devious, but he's very good at managing people, including me. In fact, sometimes I sit there and think, you're doing this really well. The way he's dealing with a particular point I want to get resolved. And I admire his technique. He's very good at managing me. But I know he's doing it. I can feel it. So I will do the same to him. I'll say, oh, I don't know. You say, you know, Terry, this is about a young footballing team. How well do you think the players you pick for this game actually... Do you think that the players can actually give you that? Which is me saying... Why did you pick them? But exactly, in an indirect way. Yeah. And I think I hope that's an agreement we have. He's very patient and talks to me at length about it. And indeed, one of the things that's become obvious to me about football from the very beginning, and particularly with Dave Anderson, and then Terry is, they'll talk to you all day about football, and that's heaven, but I get no work done. Yeah. It's really great to talk to people who know what they're talking about, or, yeah, they do know what they're talking about, who can educate me. And one of the reasons I do the job is I don't think I know how to watch football properly. I'm learning from them what's going on the pitch. A lot of us, this is oversimplistic, but a lot of us just watch the ball. And actually, there's so much more to be seen. The only analogy I can give that makes sense to me is I used to play chess to quite a good level, roughly county level, not brilliant, but quite good. And a bad chess player or a beginner will go on and count the pieces and say, well, he's winning because he's got an extra pawn, whatever. A good chess player will look at it and see a pattern and say, well, he's winning. He might not have all the same material, but he's got everybody in the right place. And they just take a strategic view and they can see a big picture. I'm a bad chess player when it comes to watching football. I don't count the men on the pitch, but the analogy is similar. I don't really stand back and say, what's the pattern of the game? How's it working? And I'm being educated first by Dave and then by Terry, so that I think I know more about it now, a lot more than I did. And I'm really grateful to them for that. And what I try to bring to them is some business thinking and some changes. I used to have enormously long debates and discussions. There were never arguments with Dave Anderson on... whenever he would say to me, I'd say, why does this happen? Oh, that's football. And I'd just rise to it immediately. I'm not having that, Dave. That's football means it's always been like that and it can't change. Everything can change. We're going to change that if it needs to be changed. Now let's talk about it. And so that's football became a banned expression. Tell me what's going on. And Dave, I think, says, and I know he means it, he really enjoyed these sessions because he didn't have people who would come along and say, well, why? A simple example, I went along to training towards the end of the season one year with Dave. I don't know which one it was, but they were doing their training and they were doing what looked to me like stamina training. Dave, why are they doing that? Well, because that's training. But They've been playing all season. Surely stamina training isn't, why would you do stamina training now? And then moved on to a wider subject of, when I was in business, if I was going to do some training, I'd tell people what we're going to try to achieve in the training, and then we'd do the training, and then we'd practice it, and we'd see if they'd achieved it. Isn't it the same in any sort of training? Oh, no, you're just turning on the C types, which is his standard response to me when he was getting fed up with me. It was just wind me up. But those are the sorts of things I try to ask. Why are you doing that? As an intelligent layman, I don't understand it, so tell me why you're doing that. And I learned a lot, and occasionally he would change and Terry do something slightly differently as a result. And I think that's the contribution I bring. I would never say, Terry, you should be playing 3-5-2 or 4-4-2. I wouldn't dream of it. But I sometimes go into his room where the whiteboard's up with the team up there, and I raise an eyebrow. That's about it.
So what happens at matches? Say we're not playing as well as we should do. What goes through you? What emotions? Because you don't grumble like I grumble, and sometimes at matches and complain a bit and shout. You're quite cool and.
Really? Well, I don't realise that because I'm inside me, not looking at me from the outside. I'm calm most of the time. I go frantic when we score. Just everybody else, because it's this enormous release, isn't it? The tension and the need to. The desperate need to see your team win. What am I thinking? I'm trying to watch the game and understand what's going on. I'm mentally willing them to do what I want. I do grumble when players fail to do the easy thing. It seems to me, if I listen to Terry, he'll often say, it's a simple pass, that's all you need. You don't need to play the killer ball every time. I get frustrated by that, but most of the time, I'm just wrapped up in my own mental world. There's nothing else around me. I'm just me and tunnel vision on the pitch. So I don't grumble because what's the point? They can't change things. I hear from other people, especially in the men's stand and around the dugout, that there are people who spend the entire game, or it feels like it, grumbling and complaining. I never played a very good level of football, but I do remember playing a game once where I did something stupid, and the centre-back came over and gave me a right hammering for it. And when he'd finished, I said, do you think I meant to do that? No. Do you think what you just said, do you think I hadn't noticed I'd made a mistake? No. Well, what are you saying that for? Do you think you're helping me? Well, all you're doing is making yourself feel better. By this time the game's going on around us. But I don't understand why people. It's frustration, and you're venting your own frustration. But what good does it do to tell a player that he's useless? How can it possibly help them? Why do people do that? Because they're fed up. Like when we make a mistake, they write to me and say, "I thought it was a fans' club." I had a piece of correspondence recently that said, "It's just like Koppel being around again." And I thought, how can you say that? We made a mistake, we got something wrong, but that's about as bad an insult as you could level at me.
That's awful.
I wrote a very polite note back, and the gentleman had the grace and goodwill to say, well, yeah, that was unfair, but that's the passion football brings out in you. That's why we watch it. But sometimes it's really quite destructive. And when I stand on the terraces and hear people saying so-and-so is useless and saying it all game, I just think you're destroying them.
Yeah.
Why? I'm quite tempted to stand behind them and say, that's a useless comment, and do that for the whole game. And then at the end say, do you feel better for me telling you that? But of course, that's just a silly notion. So
do you worry at night or at weekends sometimes when things aren't going so well? Do you because it's a big responsibility, because ultimately you're the CEO, the responsibility stops with you.
Well, Eileen will tell you that I do. I don't think I do that much. I was really surprised in the run-up to the Hampton game and the games before that. I was very cool and chilled. I didn't wake up thinking about it, and Eileen, on the other hand, was the opposite. She woke up thinking, oh, there's a game coming, and she gets... Everybody's different. She was quite stressed about it. I was chilled. During the game, I was okay, but after we'd won, and we'd achieved our objective. We only drew, I know. the following week I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning thinking, oh, we've got to get the season tickets sorted, or we've got to get whatever. Yeah. And actually at the end of the game, and this is sad, while everyone was on the pitch jumping up and down and celebrating, or in the dog and fox doing all that, at the end of the game, one of the pleasures I get is watching the fans having a good time when we've won something. Just fading in the background. You won't get me on the pitch jumping up and down. I'm too reserved and conservative, except in that moment when we score, when I lose it. But apart from that, but I stood at the back of that really deep terrace at Hampton, watching the fans having a great time, and thinking, isn't that lovely? Isn't that wonderful? Isn't it fantastic what we've all done? And then thinking, and I don't have to plan contingency plans for playoffs, because I'm afraid I go straight on to what's next, and I don't really allow myself time to enjoy it, which is a great shame. And it's something lacking in my life. I don't really enjoy it as much as everybody else seems to. I wish I could.
That's because you have so many details to think of, I would guess.
Who knows? There's probably something quite deep and psychological and repressed in there that I probably better not go to. But I enjoy the moment, and I enjoy the second when we win. But within there's that, and there's what am I going to write on my page for next week, and immediately I go to there.
So how long will you keep going, do you think, as CEO of AFC Wimbledon?
I don't know. I love the job. I believe I'm good at it. I need to build something with everyone else, and it's not just me, of course, that will run when I don't do it anymore, whenever that might be, which is why we've been doing all this stuff around strategic decisions. It would flatter it to call what we've done a strategy, but there's some big decisions we've been making recently. And one of them has to be a structure that would make me feel, as a shareholder and member of the Don's Trust, that constraints are in place to make sure that whoever's doing the job that I'm currently doing can't run amok. Because I could. Yeah. However strong a system you build, if the person at the top is the wrong one, you can, through incompetence or through deviousness, you can kill it. And the fans need to watch everything carefully, including me, even though I assure you I'm honest and straight and all that stuff. Watch very carefully, otherwise everything we've done will be undermined and will dissipate, and there'll be nothing there. And that would be... Tragedy is an overused word, but it probably would be a tragedy after all the effort everybody's put into it.
Yeah, and it does amaze me, actually, that basically how harmonious the whole club is. I know there's always the odd person that maybe doesn't agree on everything, but when you look at kind of, you've got 4,000 or 5,000 people who are coming to the matches on a fairly regular basis, i.e., we had 4,700, I think it was, last Saturday. And there's so many different opinions on how things should be done, people with different backgrounds. The fact that basically most of the time things are done fairly trouble-free, I think is brilliant.
It struck me, one of the big challenges I think we face, and I think it's for me to face initially, is when our crowds double, provided the ground's big enough to do it, how do you keep the culture that feels very special to me with the new... Well, average gate this season, I think, is about 3,000. This year's about 3,200, I think. I haven't done the sums yet. So when our crowd's at 6,400, how do you get those extra 3,200 people to understand the culture where we've come from? By all means, change it, because they're entitled to a view, but not to think that it's a club where you scream at the chairman for not putting more money in, because that isn't what this club is. Where the fans, the conference officials commented to me on how immaculately the fans behaved after the game against St Albans, and how impressed they were by that. How I can wander around in the car park, as I do, and in the bars, and anybody can talk to me that wants to, which is how I believe it should be, and I like that. But I don't get any abuse. I get stroppy letters sometimes when people are really disappointed with something we've probably done badly. Yeah. But I don't get any abuse. It's extraordinarily friendly, and I honestly don't know how we did it, because it must have been a communal thing. But if we could only preserve that, what a club it will be. It will continue to be.
Well, it's been done because things have been done in an open way, an honest way, and
But there must be more to it than that, Ian. There must be.
And I think
it can't be that simple.
Well, we've gone through such a history in terms of what we've lost, and it's so brilliant to have something we've all created that everyone in their own way has helped to create it a lot. Yeah. Obviously, certain people put a lot more work in, but overall it is a fans club, and I think people respond to that.
Maybe. Mark Jones is very articulate on some of these issues, and in one of the Football Hurts programmes, I think it was, he said that, perhaps is what I should have been saying to Eileen when she was waking up fretting, this is what we built a football club for, to fret and to be anxious and to be upset. And let's enjoy it, and let's enjoy it together. And I think we do. I do. I love it. To answer your original question, how much longer can I do it? How much longer will you let me? Is probably the answer. I'm bound to get tired as I get older and feel there's a time to move on. But right now, I don't want to stop.
Brilliant.
I love every moment.
Good. We're going to finish now. Thanks a lot, Eric, for coming along and talking to us. And we've learned a bit more about how you, Eric, function, a bit more about your past.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for watching Cherry Red TV and AFC Wimbledon TV. This is the first of a series we're going to do in different Wimbledon personalities, shall we say. So we'll see you again soon, hopefully. Goodbye.